Pamelo, now South Africa's prisons are overcrowded given the country's very high levels of crime. Earlier this year, the Justice and Correctional Services Minister Ronad Lamola said that there are almost 163,000 inmates in the country's prisons. The 2018-2019 crime statistics released earlier this month showed an increase in serious crimes like murder, robbery and sexual offences. Joining us now from Cape Town is Professor Lukas Muntingh, the co-founder and project coordinator of the Africa Criminal Justice Reform, to talk to us about the possible solutions to the problem of overcrowding in the country's prisons. A very good morning to you, Professor. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to Morning Live.
Good morning.
Now, earlier this year, Professor, the Justice Minister said prisons across the country are overcrowded. Do you think that it is perhaps a good indication that the police are making progress in fighting crime and that the justice system is working?
I'm afraid not. The fact of the matter is that the prison population stabilized in 2008 roundabout at 155,000 to 160,000 people now. Roughly a third of that, or 30%, are awaiting trial. So our sentenced population has remained remarkably stable, which tells us that the criminal justice system is not successful in prosecuting and convicting repeat and dangerous offenders. What has happened, however, is that due to the mandatory minimum sentences, people convicted of offences are staying for longer and longer. And the last figure at my disposal was that there are close on 20,000 people serving life imprisonment. So that's roughly 1 out of every 5 sentenced people. Life imprisonment increased in no other country like South Africa since the mid-1990s.
Yeah, and the 2018-2019 crime statistics reveal that serious crimes like murder, robbery and sexual offences has actually increased. So do you think that prisons will become even more overcrowded in the future if we continue to see increases like these?
Yeah, but we must be very careful about how we interpret the reported crime figures, because there are reasons why people report crime or not report crime. As a rule of thumb, we can say that the figure for murder is fairly accurate, but for many of the other offences, and the less serious the offence is, the less likely it is that people will report it. So we must be careful in what we read in the reported crime figures.
So the Department of Justice says that it wants the judiciary to look at alternative forms of punishment to make more space in jails. Your thoughts on this?
Yeah, there's good legislation in place dealing with a wide range of sentencing options dating back to the 1980s, when community service orders was first introduced, and shortly thereafter correctional supervision. We have a range of sentencing options relating to suspended sentences, deferred sentences. So there are really no substantial shortcomings in law. And then we also have a very well-established parole regime. So it's not about that. What we are looking for is a more effective criminal justice system, and that will mean that we will see an increase in the prison population if we are able to successfully prosecute and convict repeat dangerous offenders.
You are suggesting a more effective criminal justice system, but then what are the possible alternative punishments and for which crimes?
I think, we can take guidance from the Child Justice Act that deals with children, and that exposure to the criminal justice system should be limited as far as possible. But our problem in terms of crime is the repeat offenders that are not being prosecuted, and then also a very large percentage of cases that are handled by the National Prosecuting Authority through alternative dispute resolution or mediation. And we don't know how that system functions and whether the right people are being diverted through that system.
Do you think sending people to jail for minor offences is also leading to the overcrowding of prisons?
No, undoubtedly. And I think our courts are fairly aware of that. And there are various release mechanisms. Of course, one should limit the exposure, especially of young first offenders, to the harshness of the prison regime. Very often they are recruited into gangs and so on. But I must also add that the offence profile of our prison population has changed significantly over time, from the early 1990s to where we are now, where the majority of people serving prison sentences now are there for violent offences. That it used to be the reverse, that the majority were there for property offences.
Now, seeing that most of our jails are generally 150% full, some of the inmates do not have beds. I mean, especially those who've been surveyed say 66% do not have beds. Some of them do not even have bedding. So what kind of effect does this have on inmates?
I must add that some prisons are severely overcrowded, and these are typically the large urban-based awaiting trial prisons, like parts of St Albans, Paulsboro in Cape Town, parts of Durban, Westville, and so on. Whereas other prisons, they have got adequate accommodation, or at least not severely overcrowded, and they've got enough infrastructure, bedding, and so on. But it is true that there are places that are severely overcrowded, and then they are short on resources. And I think that is an affront to any person's dignity, that you have to sleep on the floor in an overcrowded cell.
And almost 40% of deaths reported in the last financial year was suicides. What could possibly cause the spike of this, and is it something that's preventable?
Yeah, I think one can definitely do a lot more in terms of monitoring prisoners who are identified as having or being a suicide risk. But I don't get the sense that the department has any coordinated effort or plan to reduce the number of suicides, because a person is ultimately in the custody of the state, and the state must see that person does not harm themselves.
Yeah, and particularly so because the treatment of inmates with mental illnesses is of particular concern. So are our prisons well equipped to accommodate them?
No, and part of the problem is the shortage of bed space in the psychiatric hospitals, especially where a person has been referred by a court for mental observation to a psychiatric hospital, and there isn't a bed space at that point, and the person has to wait for a bed to become available at a remand prison. I think that poses significant risks, not only to the person concerned, but also to other inmates and the staff as well, especially if they have not been properly trained or briefed, or they were even informed that the person is there for waiting for bed space in the psychiatric hospital.
All right, Professor, we thank you so much for your time. That was Professor Lukas Muntingh, the co-founder and project coordinator of the Africa Criminal Justice Reform, talking to us about the possible reasons why prisons in the country are overcrowded.